Martha Green had been living under the heavy hand of illness for months, her days measured in hospital visits and test results. Yet when the opportunity came to host a rare family dinner, a tradition she had held close to her heart for years, she made a quiet, reckless choice. She skipped her appointment, rolled up her sleeves, and poured everything she had into baking the foods her family loved, each recipe a stitch in the fragile fabric she was trying desperately to hold together. But when she finally emerged from her tiny kitchen, exhausted but proud, she found empty plates and crumpled napkins. They had eaten without waiting. No seat had been saved for her, no moment of pause to honor the effort she had made. In that lonely silence, Martha realized that sometimes love is given without ever being noticed, and that the most important acknowledgement must come from within, not from those too busy to see. Martha Green had always believed that love was built in the small things, the careful folding of a napkin, the scent of fresh bread rising from the oven, the soft clatter of plates set out on an old oak table. Her life had been stitched together through decades of quiet service, raising 3 children, working nights at the local diner, and building a home where laughter could be found even when money was tight. Now, in the later years of her life, when her body had begun to betray her, and her strength was no longer something she could summon at will, Martha clung to these small rituals more than ever. They were the threads that connected her to the life she had built, the family she had sacrificed so much for. The hospital had become an unwelcome but regular part of her existence, a place where she sat under flickering fluorescent lights waiting for blood work, scans, and the endless cautious optimism of doctors who no longer promised too much. It was there, sitting in one of those cold, hard chairs, that she overheard her daughter Denise planning a family gathering. Martha smiled quietly to herself. It had been months since they had all been together under one roof. The thought of the house filled with chatter, of her grandchildren running through the halls she had once cleaned on hands and knees, filled her with a hope so fierce it took her breath away. At her next appointment, the doctor reminded her of the upcoming scan, important, necessary, not something to delay. But Martha thought about the gathering, about the opportunity to bake her famous apple pies, to roll out biscuit dough with her arthritic hands, to set a table heavy with warmth and memory. She nodded politely to the doctor, tucked the appointment, card into her purse, and decided she would reschedule later. Family came first. It always had. The morning of the dinner, Martha rose before dawn, her body protesting each movement. She moved slowly, carefully, as she sifted flour, kneaded dough, and chopped apples seasoned with cinnamon and nutmeg. The kitchen filled with the comforting smells of home, and for a little while, the pain in her joints, the tightness in her chest, receded into the background. She hummed as she worked, memories flickering behind her eyes, Denise's 8th birthday cake, Robert's first Thanksgiving turkey, the countless Sunday dinners that had formed the backbone of their family. Story. By mid-afternoon, the table was set. Martha had pulled out her best dishes, the ones with tiny blue flowers around the rim, chipped in places but still beautiful. She placed pitchers of sweet tea and lemonade at the center, alongside platters of roast chicken, green beans snapped and simmered with bacon, mashed potatoes whipped just the way her grandchildren liked. And at the end of the table, 3 golden apple pies, their crusts glistening under a brush of cream and sugar, sat cooling on wire racks. She heard the laughter before she saw them, car doors slamming, footsteps on the porch, the front door, swinging open without a knock, just as it always had when the house was truly alive. Martha wiped her hands on her apron and moved toward the doorway, her heart full to bursting. "Smells amazing, Mom," Denise called over her shoulder as she shepherded her children inside. Martha smiled, feeling the old familiar warmth spread through her chest. She returned to the kitchen to pull the final tray of biscuits from the oven, her mind already picturing the way they would all gather around the table, how they would bow, their heads in a brief, chaotic prayer before diving in, how they would fill her home with noise and love. But when she stepped into the dining room, balancing the tray carefully in her hands, she froze. The platters were already half empty. The chairs were filled with her children and grandchildren, plates piled high, mouths full, laughter echoing, off the walls. No one had waited. No one had noticed her absence. They had simply served themselves, started without her. The meal she had poured her fragile strength into now just another quick refueling before the evening's distractions. Martha stood there for a moment, the tray trembling slightly in her hands, before quietly setting it down. She smoothed her apron, swallowed the lump rising in her throat, and forced a small smile when Robert waved at her with a half-eaten biscuit in hand. "Mom, you outdid yourself," he said cheerfully. "These biscuits are the best yet." She nodded, murmuring a thank you, and took her seat at the corner of the table, unnoticed among the buzz of conversation. No one asked where she had been. No one remarked on the effort or the sacrifice, and for the first time in her long, giving life, Martha felt truly alone in a room full of the people she had loved most. After the plates were cleared and the last pie had been sliced without ceremony, Martha found herself moving through the motions of the evening like a ghost. She listened to the chatter around her, smiling when appropriate, laughing softly when the conversation called for it, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't help but notice the way Denise scrolled through her phone under the table, the way Robert barely looked up from a game he was playing with his son on a tablet, the way her youngest daughter, Lisa, talked mostly about work and new restaurants in the city she now called home. They were all so busy, so full of their own lives, and Martha, once the center of their world, had become little more than background noise, the soft hum of a house too familiar to appreciate. She cleared the dishes quietly while they lounged. In the living room, her joints aching from hours spent on her feet, her breath catching once or twice when she bent too low. No one noticed her struggling to carry the heavy serving trays. No one offered to help wash or dry. She had raised them to be independent, she told herself, to be strong and self-sufficient. It was what any mother would want. But as she stood at the sink, her hands submerged in soapy water, she felt the undeniable sting of being taken for granted. The appointment she had missed that morning drifted through her mind in sharp flashes, the concerned look on the nurse's face, the doctor's words heavy with warning about the risks of delay. She had brushed it all aside for this, for the chance to create one more memory around her battered old table. And yet, as she stood there, scrubbing at plates already picked clean without her even sitting down to eat, she wondered if anyone truly remembered the effort behind the meal, the sacrifice tucked between each course. Later, when the children announced their departures, there were quick hugs at the door, promises to call soon, to visit more often. Martha clung to each one, knowing they were spoken with good intentions, but no real commitment. She watched them pile into their cars, headlights slicing the early evening gloom, and waved until the taillights disappeared from view. Only when the last car turned the corner did she allow her hand to fall, the weight of the day pressing heavily onto her tired frame. Inside the house, the echoes of their presence lingered, a jacket forgotten on the back of a chair, crumbs scattered on the rug, a coffee cup left teetering on the edge of the counter. Martha moved through the rooms slowly, tidying up with mechanical precision. The house felt larger somehow, emptier than it had even before they arrived, as though their brief stay had stretched the walls and thinned the warmth. When she finally sat down in her favorite armchair, the one with the worn floral pattern and the soft dip where her body had molded it over years, she allowed herself to rest. She stared at the darkened television screen, her reflection faint, in the glass, and thought about all the times she had dropped everything for her family. The late nights sewing Halloween costumes, the weekends spent hosting birthday parties, the countless miles driven for school events and emergencies alike. How easily it all faded into the background once the children grew older, once their needs shifted beyond the reach of a mother's hands. She didn't blame them, not really. Life moved fast, faster than she remembered it moving when she was young. There were jobs to be tended to, bills to pay, dreams to chase. She wanted them to live fully, to be happy, to reach for the things she had never dared dream of herself. But she wished, just once, they might pause long enough to look back and see her still standing there, arms wide and heart full, waiting not for applause, but for simple recognition. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily into the evening hours, and outside, the first chill of spring settling into night brushed against the windows. Martha pulled a knitted blanket over her lap and closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to gather the broken pieces of her heart and hold them gently in her hands. She knew she would keep showing up for them, keep baking the pies and setting the table, and keep answering the phone at any hour when they needed her voice to steady theirs. It was who she was. It was the kind of love she understood best, not loud or demanding, but constant and true. Still, she promised herself something in that quiet room. She would stop waiting for them to notice. She would learn to see herself, even when they did not. She would find her joy in the doing, not in the thanks that so rarely followed. And in that small, aching promise, Martha Green began to reclaim something she had forgotten she deserved: her own heart, her own worth, her own quiet place in a world that too often hurried past without seeing. The following week, Martha returned to the hospital for the appointment she had missed. The doctor's face was kind but serious, his voice gentle as he explained the consequences of the delay. The infection they had been monitoring had worsened, spreading more deeply than before. A new round of treatments would be needed, stronger and harsher this time, and even then, there were no guarantees. Martha nodded calmly, listening to every word as if he were describing the weather instead of her own body failing piece by piece. She had always been practical about these things. Life had taught her early that tears changed nothing. Strength, she knew, was quieter than sorrow. After the appointment, she sat alone in the hospital cafe, stirring a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Around her, life bustled forward, nurses rushing past with clipboards, visitors carrying bright balloons and wilting flowers. She watched them with a strange detachment, as if she had slipped out of the normal flow of the world and could only observe from the margins. Her mind wandered to the family dinner, to the laughter that had filled her house for a few short hours, to the empty chair at the table that no one had noticed she hadn't filled. Martha knew she couldn't blame them entirely. She had made it easy to overlook her needs. She had spent a lifetime putting everyone else first, smoothing every wrinkle, filling every gap without complaint. She had taught them through her actions that she was a given, a certainty, a quiet background to their busier, louder lives. She didn't resent the love she had given, but she realized now, sitting in the faded vinyl booth with the cold coffee, that somewhere along the way, she had forgotten to leave a little love for herself. Returning home, Martha moved through the house more slowly than before, the walls echoing with the silence of her own thoughts. She canceled the next dinner she had planned, citing the need for rest and recovery. Denise sounded surprised when she called to tell her, offering a vague, "Let me know if you need anything," that floated in the space between them before the conversation shifted to easier topics. The days grew long and lonely. Martha read books she had always meant to finish, sat in the garden with a blanket over her knees, and listened to the birds calling to one another in the trees. The world kept moving, just as it always did. Birthdays came and went, holidays approached, and the invitations grew fewer and more hurried. Quick texts asking if she could come by, if she might bake something if she had the time. Always framed as a favor, a convenience, never a celebration of her presence itself. The ache in her chest grew heavier, not just from her illness, but from the slow realization that she had spent so much of her life building a home that no longer needed her. In it, it wasn't unkindness that hurt the most. It was the easy assumption that she would always be there, always give, always say yes. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky blushed pink and gold, Martha sat on the front porch, a quilt wrapped around her shoulders. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one who dreamed of adventures, who loved to dance, who once believed the world would notice her simply because she loved so fiercely. She wondered when that girl had disappeared, quietly folding herself away behind casseroles and carpool schedules, behind birthday parties and Christmas mornings. In the growing darkness, Martha made another quiet promise. She would not spend whatever time she had left waiting to be seen by people too busy to look. She would not measure her worth by how many plates she filled or how many favors she fulfilled. She would find new ways to matter, ways that filled her own soul rather than merely feeding others' expectations. It was a promise stitched not from bitterness, but from a deep, aching need for something she had given to everyone else so freely: kindness, patience, love. And for the first time in a long while, she intended to give it to herself. In the quiet days that followed her decision, Martha found herself turning inward in ways she hadn't done in years. She no longer filled her calendar with obligations. She let the days unfold naturally, without the pressure of doing for others. At first, the stillness felt foreign, like stepping into an unfamiliar house where every sound echoed a little too loudly. She had spent a lifetime finding her worth in usefulness. Without the constant demands of family dinners, errand lists, and last-minute favors, she wasn't sure who she was supposed to be. But slowly, something softer began to settle in her. She started reading again, not just the cookbooks and magazines that had filled her coffee table for decades, but thick novels with stories she could lose herself in. She pulled out the old set of watercolors tucked away in the back of the hall closet, supplies she had once bought on a whim but never found time to use. Sitting at the kitchen table, sunlight warming her back, Martha dipped her brush into the paint and let color bloom across the blank pages. In those quiet moments, she rediscovered the small, steady joy of creating something just for herself, without anyone else's approval or need attached. She wasn't making a pie to be devoured. Before she sat down, she wasn't arranging flowers to be forgotten in a rush to the next event. She was painting because it made her heart lift in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. The emotional landscape inside her began to shift as well. Where loneliness had carved deep grooves in her spirit, acceptance began to smooth the rough edges. She understood now that her family's forgetfulness wasn't a verdict on her worth. It was simply the nature of life rushing forward, sometimes too fast for gratitude to catch up. Their failure to notice her sacrifices didn't erase their existence. It didn't diminish the love she had given. It didn't negate the life she had built with her own two hands. In fact, recognizing her own value, separate from their acknowledgement, became a quiet triumph. It was an act of reclaiming, a way of standing taller even if no one else happened to be looking. Martha's heart, once worn thin by endless giving, began to mend, not through grand gestures, but through the daily, deliberate choosing of herself. In the small sanctuary of her home, in the gentle unfolding of her own forgotten dreams, she found a kind of peace that no disappointment could take away. As spring deepened into its full bloom, Martha's small world transformed along with it. She found new rhythms that belonged only to her. Mornings spent on the porch with a cup of tea and a mystery novel. Afternoons dabbing paint onto canvas, the kitchen table cluttered with brushes, jars of water, and smudged rags. Evenings where she simply sat by the window, watching the day ebb away into soft violet skies without rushing to meet anyone else's needs. For the first time in decades, her days felt like they truly belonged to her. There were no lists she had to complete for someone else, no meals she had to labor over for guests who might not appreciate them. She cooked what she liked when she felt like it, simple meals full of fresh herbs from her little garden, savory stews that filled the house with warmth. And if there was no one else to share them with, that was all right. She savored each bite, letting the food nourish her without regret. Painting became more than just a hobby. It became a language for the emotions she had long tucked away, too busy to acknowledge. Her first paintings were timid, soft landscapes, blurry flowers, but as she grew more confident, the colors deepened, bold strokes forming scenes full of life and feeling. She hung a few around the house, filling the once bare walls with pieces of herself she had never allowed room for before. One afternoon, Helen, a neighbor from 2 doors down, stopped by after noticing Martha working in the garden. They had exchanged pleasantries for years, but Helen had always been just another friendly face in passing. This time, though, they lingered. They talked about gardens, about books, about the simple joys that filled their quieter days. When Martha shyly mentioned her painting, Helen's eyes lit up, and before she knew it, they had made plans for Martha to bring a few pieces to the local library's small art exhibition. It was a small thing, a community event where local hobbyists displayed their work, but to Martha, it felt enormous. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about stepping into a space where she could be seen not as someone's mother, someone's grandmother, but as herself. When the day of the exhibition arrived, Martha dressed carefully, choosing a soft blue blouse that brought out the color of her eyes and a light scarf with little roses printed along its edge. She carried her paintings into the library, heart pounding but proud. They weren't perfect, she knew. They wouldn't command crowds or collectors, but they were hers. Every brushstroke carried the weight of her story, the quiet sacrifices, the forgotten meals, the resilient, stubborn hope that had carried her through years of invisibility. As she walked through the rows of art, exchanging warm smiles and nods with other local artists, she felt a sense of belonging she hadn't realized she was missing. These were people who created because it mattered to them, not because it was expected or demanded. They understood the quiet bravery it took to offer a piece of your heart to the world without assurance it would be praised or even noticed. When a young woman paused in front of one of Martha's paintings, a vibrant field of marigolds under a stormy sky, and whispered, "It's beautiful." Martha felt something break open gently inside her. It wasn't a loud victory, but a soft, soul-deep recognition. She smiled, blinking back sudden tears, and simply said, "Thank you." Driving home later that afternoon, the paintings tucked safely in the back seat, Martha felt lighter than she had in years. The house greeted her warmly, the air filled with the lingering scent of lemon polish and blooming lilacs from the open windows. She set the paintings down carefully and stood for a moment in the middle of her living room, taking it all in. This life, this quiet, uncelebrated, fiercely tender life, was still hers. It wasn't measured by how many people applauded or how many family dinners she hosted. It was measured by the way she chose to keep loving, to keep creating, to keep showing up for herself even when no one else noticed. And in that choice, Martha found a kind of freedom she had never known she needed. Just when Martha thought she had settled into a quieter, more peaceful chapter of her life, another wave of hurt rose unexpectedly to test the fragile balance she had built. It began with a phone call from Denise, cheerful and rushed, filled with plans for a summer family reunion. They were renting a big lake house 2 hours away, a beautiful place with a dock, canoes, and sprawling green lawns where the kids could run wild. Everyone would be there, Denise said, all the siblings and grandkids. And of course, they wanted Martha to come too. Martha's heart leapt at the thought, the old instincts stirring, visions of fresh lemonade, picnic tables heaped with food, and the sweet chaos of family filling the air. For a moment, she forgot the cautions she had so carefully taught herself. She agreed before Denise even finished the invitation, already imagining the apple pies she might bake, the special corn, salad her grandkids always loved. Maybe, she thought, maybe this time they would notice. Maybe this time they would see her not just as a presence to fill the background, but as someone still offering them the best pieces of her heart. In the days leading up to the trip, Martha shopped carefully, spending hours baking, preparing treats she knew each grandchild loved, packing up coolers and baskets. She even bought a new sun hat and a sturdy pair of sandals, telling herself she would join in the canoe rides, the bonfires, the laughter. She longed not to be just the cook in the background, but part of the living, breathing moments she had worked so hard to make possible. The morning of the reunion, Martha woke early and loaded her car with the carefully prepared foods and her small suitcase. The drive was beautiful, winding through fields and forests, sunlight dancing through the leaves. Her spirits lifted as she neared the lake house, the sound of children's laughter floating on the breeze as she pulled into the long gravel driveway. But the reality that greeted her was a little different than the picture she had imagined. The house was already bustling, children running barefoot through the grass, adults gathered in groups with coolers cracked open, music playing loud enough to rattle the windows. Martha parked at the far end of the driveway, unnoticed amid the cheerful chaos. She unloaded her car slowly, the baskets heavy in her aging hands, making 3 trips before anyone thought to call out a distracted hello. Inside the house, the kitchen counters were already piled high with store-bought snacks and takeout containers. Someone had brought trays of deli sandwiches, and pizza boxes leaned precariously against the fridge. Martha's homemade pies and carefully packed dishes were squeezed onto the edge of a table, barely glanced at in the flurry of chatter and paper plates. She smiled, hiding her disappointment. She told herself it didn't matter if no one noticed the difference between her warm, lovingly prepared food and the convenience of prepackaged meals. But a small, aching part of her whispered that it did matter. Not because she needed praise, but because what she brought, her time, her history, her love, deserved to be seen. As the day wore on, she found herself more and more on the fringes. She watched from the porch as her children and grandchildren played games, organized races, and built bonfires without ever really inviting her in. She was there, yes, but not part of the heart of it. When the evening meal came, everyone grabbed sandwiches and chips without ceremony. Her pies were barely touched. Later, as the stars blinked to life above the lake, Martha stood at the edge of the dock, watching the shimmering water reflect the moonlight. Behind her, laughter drifted from the bonfire, but no one noticed she was missing. Her heart felt heavy, but this time, the pain wasn't sharp like it had been after the family dinner. It was a dull, steady ache, like the settling of something she could no longer deny. Martha realized then that no matter how much she gave, no matter how carefully she prepared her gifts of love, she could not force others to see them the way she saw them. She could not make them value what they had taken for granted for so long. That truth hurt, but it also set her free. She could love without shrinking. She could give without losing herself. The stars above seemed to pulse gently with her revelation, their light ancient and enduring. Just like the kind of love she had lived all her life, quiet, steadfast, and shining even when no one thought to look up. That night, after most of the family had drifted off to their rooms or curled up by the bonfire, Martha found herself wandering back to the kitchen. She moved quietly, careful not to disturb the sleeping house. The light over the sink glowed softly, casting long shadows across the floor. Her pies still sat there, barely touched, the crusts beginning to sag, the filling dull under the thin layer of cooling air. For a long moment, she simply stood and stared at them. Each pie represented hours of effort, a whole day's worth of love packed into cinnamon and apples, butter and sugar. Each one was a testament to the woman she had been her whole life, someone who showed love by giving pieces of herself, small and sweet, wrapped in tenderness and devotion. She could almost see the reflection of her younger self in the kitchen window, hair pinned up hastily, apron dusted with flour, arms strong and steady from years of lifting, kneading, caring. Martha moved to the table and sat down heavily. She pulled a slice of pie onto a plate, cut carefully from the least damaged one, and picked up a fork. She took a small bite, letting the familiar flavors bloom across her tongue. The pie was good as she had always made it. She thought about all the other times she had baked these same pies, the Thanksgiving after Robert's accident. When laughter felt forced, the 4th of July when Denise was going through her divorce and the house needed to feel normal. The countless Sunday dinners when she had woven broken hearts back together with pastry and patience. The pie had always been a bridge, a way of keeping the family together even when words failed them. And now, as she sat there alone, she realized the bridge no longer led to the place it once had. It wasn't malice that had broken it. It was life, the relentless movement forward, the way children outgrew the arms that once sheltered them. It was inevitable. It was natural. But knowing that didn't make the solitude taste any sweeter. She finished her slice slowly, savoring it not as a gift for anyone else, but for herself. She had earned it. She had earned every tender crumb, every hard-won moment of sweetness. When she stood, she didn't pack away the leftover pies to be nibbled at by others in their own time. Instead, she wrapped them carefully and placed them into the cooler she had brought from home. Tomorrow, she would take them back, perhaps, share them with her neighbors or the ladies from her reading club, people who would welcome her efforts with open hands and warm smiles. Before heading to bed, Martha stepped outside one more time. The lake stretched out before her, calm and wide, a mirror of the starry sky. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and took a deep breath of the cool night air. Somewhere, in the house behind her, her family slept, safe and happy in their small, busy lives. She was proud of them. She loved them fiercely. But she would not keep waiting for them to see her the way she once hoped they would. She had seen herself now. Truly seen herself, not just as a mother or a baker or a background figure, but as a woman who had survived with grace and kindness, even when her gifts went unnoticed. A woman who had built a life worth celebrating, even if the celebration came quietly from within. In the distance, a loon called across the water, its cry low and lonely and beautiful. Martha felt no loneliness in that moment. Only understanding, only peace. Love, she realized, was never wasted, even when it wasn't recognized. Every pie, every meal, every small sacrifice had been real. It mattered. It had shaped the people, who now lived their lives more fully because of it. And now it was her turn to live fully too, not in the shadow of others' needs, but in the full, warm light of her own choosing. She turned away from the lake, the shawl brushing softly around her, and walked back toward the house. Her steps were slow but steady. Tomorrow she would leave early while the others still slept and drive home to the life she had quietly, stubbornly reclaimed. Not because she was bitter, not because she was hurt, but because at last she understood her own worth. And that was a gift she had given herself. The morning sun was just beginning to slip across the horizon when Martha quietly loaded her car. She moved without rushing, savoring the coolness of the air before the heat of the day took hold. The house behind her remained silent, save for the occasional creak of its old bones settling. She paused for a moment before opening the driver's door, letting her gaze sweep once more over the place that had hosted so many dreams, so much hope. It had been a beautiful reunion for them, filled with laughter and easy joy, and Martha felt no anger for having existed only at its edges. She had finally come to understand something much deeper. Her life's value did not depend on how brightly others shine their light on her. As the car rolled down the gravel driveway, she looked into the rearview mirror, not out of regret, but out of gratitude. Gratitude for the years she had been given, for the memories made, even if they had faded in others' minds faster than they had in hers. Gratitude for the strength she had rediscovered, piece by piece, in the silent places she used to fear. The drive home was peaceful, the winding country roads unfolding like ribbons across the fields. Martha hummed softly to herself, an old hymn her mother used to sing while kneading bread, a song that had filled kitchens and hearts long before her own journey had begun. She wasn't rushing anymore. She wasn't chasing anyone's approval. She was simply moving forward at her own steady pace. When she reached her house, it welcomed her back with the familiar creak of the porch steps and the faint scent of lavender from the bushes she had planted years ago. Inside, the air was cool and still, and Martha felt a warmth settle over her that had nothing to do with the summer sun. She carried her cooler of untouched pies into the kitchen and set it down on the counter with a soft laugh. Those pies would not go to waste. She would share them with people who would taste them and understand the love baked into every flaky layer. That afternoon, she packed a basket with slices of pie, fresh lemonade, and a stack of her new watercolor paintings. She delivered the basket to the community center for the volunteers and hung her paintings for the next local art event. Each small act stitched a little more joy into the fabric of her days, a quilt of kindness and creation she built now for herself. Martha Green no longer waited to be seen, no longer stood at the edge of other people's celebrations. She lived within her own moments, fully, gratefully, quietly shining in the soft light she had kindled from within. In the days that followed, Martha often found herself reflecting on how much life had shifted around her without her noticing. The years had been a slow river carrying her along, always focused on reaching for others, always measuring her days by what she could give. But now, as she sat on her porch in the golden hush of early evening, she realized how deeply important it was to measure life differently, to measure it by the quiet contentment blooming inside her, not by the applause or acknowledgement of others. She watched the sparrows dart among the trees, their songs bright against the fading sky, and thought about the strength it took to love so deeply, even when love wasn't returned in ways you expected. She thought about the countless meals, the stitched Halloween costumes, the patient, forgiving way she had held her family through every one of their storms. Those moments, invisible to everyone else, were the truest markers of a life well lived. Martha understood now that dignity wasn't something someone else could give you. It was something you carried, quietly and surely, through every joy and disappointment. It was the quiet refusal to allow hurt to harden your heart. It was the choice to keep loving, even when you learned to love differently. Her family would go on building their lives, busy and bright, sometimes near her, sometimes far. She would always love them, but she would no longer wait at the edges, hoping to be seen. She had found her place, and it was not behind anyone else's spotlight. It was firmly, beautifully her own. As the last of the sunlight melted into the horizon and the cool night rose to take its place, Martha closed her eyes and breathed in the peace she had fought so long and quietly to find. Her life was hers, her heart was whole, and in the soft silence, Martha Green finally knew she had been enough all along. If Martha's story touched your heart, share it with someone who understands the quiet courage it takes to love without expectation and to find peace without permission. Subscribe for more timeless stories that honor resilience, invisible sacrifices, and the kind of strength that shines even when no one is watching. Thank you for being part of a community that sees the beauty in quiet lives, enduring love, and the victory of a heart that never gives up.